Good evening. I'm Alex Truth, and tonight we're covering what may be one of the most consequential weeks in modern geopolitics. The US-led war on Iran is escalating on every front, militarily, diplomatically, and technologically, and the stories we're about to break down reveal a pattern that should alarm every person watching. We have 5 stories tonight, and when you connect them, they paint a picture that no mainstream outlet is willing to show you in full. Maya, let's get into it.
Alex, let's start with something that flew under the radar in American media but made headlines across Europe. German Chancellor Friedrich Merz publicly stated that the United States and Israel appear to have no common plan regarding the war. That's the leader of Europe's largest economy, a NATO ally, essentially saying that the two countries driving this conflict don't even have a coherent shared strategy. That's not a minor diplomatic observation. That is a red flag about the chaotic nature of this war, reported by Middle East Eye.
And think about what it takes for a German chancellor to say that publicly. Germany has been one of the most cautious, most deferential nations when it comes to criticizing Israel, for obvious historical reasons. For Merz to come out and say there's no common plan between the US and Israel, he's essentially warning Europe that they're being dragged into a conflict where even the architects don't agree on the blueprint. This isn't coordinated strategy. This is two countries with overlapping but divergent interests waging war and hoping it works out.
Exactly. And the question nobody in Washington is asking is, if there's no common plan, then who is actually directing the military operations? Because the targets are still being hit. The bombs are still falling. The strikes are still happening every single day. So if there's no unified command strategy, what's driving target selection? That brings us directly to our second story, and it's one that should send chills down your spine. The South China Morning Post is reporting that the U.S. military used Anthropic's artificial intelligence tool, Claude, to help strike approximately 1,000 targets in the first 24 hours of the invasion of Iran.
Let that sink in. 1,000 targets in 24 hours, with AI optimizing target selection, analyzing intelligence data, and issuing precise location coordinates based on satellite imagery. That's according to reporting originally from the Washington Post, as cited by the South China Morning Post. And here's the part that makes this even more disturbing: Anthropic, the company that built Claude, was reportedly blacklisted by the Pentagon amid a dispute over wartime applications. So we have a situation where the military allegedly used a tool from a company that objected to its use in warfare. The chain of accountability here is completely broken.
This is the story of our generation, Alex. We are witnessing the first large-scale use of artificial intelligence in active wartime target selection. And the public hasn't had a single vote, a single debate, a single congressional hearing about whether AI should be choosing where bombs fall. The South China Morning Post piece frames this as a wake-up call to regulate military AI, and they're right. But let's be honest about why regulation hasn't happened: because the military-industrial complex doesn't want oversight on the most powerful targeting tool ever created. Speed is the selling point. 1,000 targets in a day. No human being can process that volume of decisions with genuine care for civilian life.
And that efficiency argument is exactly how they sell it. They'll tell you AI reduces civilian casualties by being more precise. But precision in target selection means nothing if the targets themselves are wrong. If the intelligence data fed into the system is flawed, if the satellite imagery is outdated, if the coordinates are off by even a fraction, you don't get precision. You get an efficiently executed massacre. And that brings us to story 5, Maya, which is perhaps the most gut-wrenching report of the night.
Middle East Eye is reporting that a UK government minister refused to call a US attack on an Iranian school a war crime. Instead, the minister described it as the realities of war. Let me say that again for everyone listening. Children were killed in a school, and a government official from one of the world's oldest democracies couldn't bring themselves to use the words war crime. They chose the phrase realities of war, as if the slaughter of children in a place of learning is simply an inevitable byproduct of geopolitics, something we should all just accept.
This is where the language becomes a weapon in itself. When you refuse to name a war crime, you are providing political cover for the perpetrators. The Geneva Conventions are explicit: attacks on schools, hospitals, and civilian infrastructure are prohibited. An attack on a school full of children is not a gray area. It is not a matter of interpretation. The UK minister's refusal to call it what it is tells you everything about where Britain's loyalties lie. They are choosing alliance with Washington over adherence to international law, and they are doing it with the blood of children on the table.
And notice the pattern here, Alex. You have AI selecting 1,000 targets a day. You have no common plan between the US and Israel, according to Germany's own chancellor. And when those targets turn out to be schools, the allied nations won't even call it a crime. This is a system designed to avoid accountability at every single level. The AI removes the human from the targeting decision. The lack of a common plan means no single authority takes responsibility. And the diplomatic language, realities of war, ensures no legal consequences follow. It's a perfect machine for impunity.
That's the architecture of modern warfare, and it's being built in real time. Now let's turn to Turkey, because what's happening there adds another terrifying dimension. Middle East Eye is reporting that Iranian missiles may be testing NATO air defenses in Turkey, potentially to target a crucial radar base. This is the Kürsük radar station, which is part of NATO's missile defense shield. If Iran is probing those defenses, it means the conflict is no longer contained to Iranian territory. It's brushing up against NATO's own infrastructure.
And this is where the escalation ladder gets truly dangerous. Turkey is a NATO member. An attack on Turkish soil, even on a radar installation, could invoke Article 5, the Collective Defense Clause. That means we could be looking at a scenario where a regional war in the Middle East triggers a full NATO response. Every European country, Canada, the United States, all bound by treaty to respond. The Iranian missiles testing those defenses aren't just a tactical maneuver. They're a strategic signal that Iran is mapping the boundaries of what it can hit if this war expands further.
And here's what the mainstream coverage misses entirely. That Kürsük radar base isn't just a defensive installation. It's been a point of contention for years because its data is shared with Israel. Turkey has periodically threatened to restrict that data sharing as a political lever. So when we talk about Iranian missiles testing NATO defenses near that base, we're also talking about the broader question of whether NATO's defense infrastructure is being used as an offensive asset in a war that NATO hasn't formally joined. The lines between defense and offense are being deliberately blurred.
Which brings us to the shooting at the US consulate in Toronto, reported by Middle East Eye. Police confirmed that shots were fired at the American consulate in Canada's largest city. Now, details are still emerging, and we need to be careful about jumping to conclusions on motive. But the context matters enormously. This is happening during a period of unprecedented anti-American sentiment across the globe, driven in large part by the war on Iran and the civilian casualties we just discussed. When you bomb schools and dismiss it as realities of war, you create the conditions for this kind of blowback.
And let me be absolutely clear, violence against diplomatic facilities is wrong, full stop. But the political class will use this incident to talk about security threats and terrorism without ever connecting it to the policies that generate rage around the world. They'll increase consulate security, issue travel warnings, and talk about protecting American interests abroad. What they won't do is ask the fundamental question: why is the United States generating this level of hostility? You cannot wage war across the Middle East, kill civilians with AI-selected targeting, and then act surprised when the anger follows you home, or to your allies' doorsteps.
That's the conversation they refuse to have, Alex. The Toronto shooting will be covered as an isolated security incident. It will not be covered as a consequence of foreign policy. And that deliberate disconnection between cause and effect is how they maintain public support for wars that the public would reject if they understood the full picture. Every story we've covered tonight is connected. The lack of a US-Israel plan shows strategic incoherence. The AI targeting shows technological recklessness. The school massacre shows moral bankruptcy. The NATO radar probing shows escalation risk. And the consulate shooting shows the blowback already arriving.
Let's go back to the AI story for a moment, because I think people need to understand the precedent being set. According to the South China Morning Post, citing Washington Post reporting, the AI tool was used for optimizing target selection, analyzing intelligence data, and issuing precise location coordinates by assessing satellite imagery. That's not AI as a support tool. That's AI as a core decision-making component in lethal operations. And the article explicitly frames this as a wake-up call for regulation. But who's going to regulate it? The same governments that are using it.
This is the fundamental problem with self-regulation in warfare. The nations with the most advanced military AI have zero incentive to restrict it. The United States, Israel, China, Russia, they're all in an AI arms race, and the battlefield in Iran is the proving ground. Every target hit, every operation conducted, every piece of data collected is feeding the next generation of these systems. Iran isn't just a war, it's a live training environment for military artificial intelligence. And the civilians caught in the crossfire are, in the coldest possible terms, the cost of that development program.
And when Anthropic reportedly objected, when the company that built the tool said no to wartime applications and was blacklisted by the Pentagon for it, that tells you the military doesn't care about the ethical guardrails the developers put in place. They'll use the tool regardless, or they'll find another company willing to provide it. The technology is out of the bottle. The question is whether there will ever be meaningful international law governing its use, and right now the answer is clearly no, because the countries that would need to sign such agreements are the ones profiting from the technology's deployment.
Let's talk about who benefits from all of this, because that's always the question Truth Report asks. The defense contractors benefit: Lockheed Martin, Raytheon, Northrop Grumman. Their stock prices have surged since the war began. The AI defense sector benefits: every company building military AI applications just got the ultimate proof of concept with 1,000 targets in 24 hours. The political establishments in Washington and Tel Aviv benefit because war is the ultimate distraction from domestic crises. And the intelligence agencies benefit because wartime powers expand surveillance authorities that never get rolled back when the fighting stops.
And who loses? Iranian civilians, first and foremost. The children in that school. The families in every one of those 1,000 targets hit in the first day. But also the people of Turkey, who may find themselves on the front line of a NATO escalation they didn't choose. The people of Canada, whose largest city just saw gunfire at a foreign consulate. The people of Germany, whose chancellor is publicly admitting that the powers driving this war don't even have a plan. And the people of the United States and Britain, whose governments are committing acts in their name that they have no knowledge of and no say in.
The UK minister's language, Realities of War, is worth examining one more time, because it reveals the entire moral framework being used to justify this. When you call the bombing of a school a reality of war, you're normalizing atrocity. You're saying this is just what happens, as if there's no choice, no agency, no one pressing the button. But someone did press the button. Someone, or something, if we're talking about AI, selected that school as a target. Someone approved the strike. Someone loaded the munition. And an entire chain of command allowed it to happen. Calling it a reality erases all of those decisions and all of that responsibility.
It's the passive voice of imperialism. Mistakes were made. Casualties occurred. The realities of war. Nobody did anything. It just happened, like weather. And that linguistic erasure is deliberate. It's taught in media training. It's refined by public relations firms that specialize in crisis communications for governments. The words are chosen specifically to prevent accountability. And when journalists accept that framing, when they report the minister's statement without challenging it, they become part of the machine.
Now, let's connect the NATO dimension more deeply. The Kirsik radar station in Turkey has been operational since 2012 as part of NATO's missile defense architecture. Middle East Eye's reporting that Iranian missiles may be testing the air defenses around it is significant because it suggests Iran is preparing for a scenario where the war extends beyond its borders. If Iran can identify gaps in NATO's radar coverage or response times, it gains a strategic advantage in any wider conflict. This isn't posturing, this is military intelligence gathering through live-fire testing.
And Turkey is in an impossible position. President Erdogan has tried to maintain a balancing act between NATO obligations and regional relationships, including with Iran. But if Iranian missiles are flying near Turkish territory to probe NATO defenses, that balancing act becomes untenable. Turkey either has to confront Iran, potentially opening a new front in the war, or it has to tolerate violations of its sovereignty, which undermines its credibility within NATO. There's no good option, and that's exactly the kind of cascading pressure that turns regional wars into global ones.
Alex, I want to come back to something you said about the 1,000 targets. When we talk about AI-optimized warfare, people imagine surgical precision. Clean strikes on military installations. But the reality, as the school bombing demonstrates, is that the intelligence feeding these systems is imperfect. Satellite imagery can't tell you if a building is being used as a school or a military command center. Signals intelligence can't distinguish between a cell phone carried by a combatant and one carried by a teacher. The AI processes what it's given, and if what it's given is wrong, it delivers death with mechanical efficiency to the wrong people.
And there's a deeper problem that nobody in the defense establishment wants to acknowledge. When you automate targeting at this scale, 1,000 strikes in 24 hours, you eliminate the possibility of meaningful human review. Even if there's technically a human in the loop approving each strike, no human can genuinely evaluate 1,000 targets in a single day. That's one target every 86 seconds, around the clock. The human approval becomes a rubber stamp. The AI is making the real decisions, and the human is providing legal cover by clicking approve.
That's the architecture of plausible deniability built into the technology itself. And it's why the South China Morning Post is right to call this a wake-up call. But the alarm has been ringing for years. Autonomous weapons experts, human rights organizations, the United Nations Secretary General, they've all warned about this exact scenario. The difference now is that it's not hypothetical. It's happening in Iran, in real time, with real casualties. The theoretical debate about killer robots is over. We're living in it.
Let's bring it all together. What we're witnessing across these 5 stories is a new model of warfare. It's a war without a plan, according to Germany. It's a war powered by AI that even its creators didn't want used this way. It's a war where schools are bombed and allies call it realities. It's a war testing NATO's defenses and threatening to engulf Turkey. And it's a war generating blowback that's already reaching Canadian soil. This isn't a contained military operation. This is a cascading crisis with no exit strategy and no accountability structure.
And the media's role in all of this cannot be ignored. These stories exist in separate silos. The German chancellor's comments are in the European press. The AI targeting story is in Asian media. The school bombing response is in Middle Eastern outlets. The consulate shooting is breaking news that will be covered without context. No major American network is connecting these threads. No primetime anchor is asking how a war with no plan, powered by artificial intelligence, bombing schools, and testing NATO's borders ends. The fragmentation of coverage is itself a form of censorship, not by suppression, but by disconnection.
That's why Truth Report exists. We connect the dots that other outlets leave scattered across the floor. And when you connect these particular dots, the picture is terrifying. We have a war being waged at machine speed with no unified strategy, no meaningful oversight, no accountability for atrocities, and escalation risks that could draw in the entire Western alliance. Every single safeguard that was supposed to prevent this kind of catastrophe, international law, congressional oversight, ethical AI principles, diplomatic coordination, has failed or been deliberately circumvented.
And I want to speak directly to our viewers about something. When you see the story about Anthropic's AI being used for targeting, and you see the story about the school being bombed, and you see the UK minister refusing to call it a war crime, put those 3 stories together. That is potentially the pipeline. AI selects the target. The military hits it. Children die. And the allied governments provide rhetorical cover. That is not conspiracy. That is the logical chain of events described across 3 separate, credible news sources. This is what modern war looks like when you strip away the euphemisms.
So what do we do? First, we demand transparency. Every AI-assisted strike should be logged, auditable, and subject to independent review. The public has a right to know when algorithms are making life-and-death decisions in their name. Second, we demand that our representatives in Congress and Parliament actually investigate. Not a committee that meets twice and issues a report nobody reads, a real investigation with subpoena power into how AI is being deployed in combat and who authorized its use against civilian infrastructure.
Third, we demand that international bodies act. The International Criminal Court should be investigating the school bombing immediately, regardless of what any UK minister calls it. The Geneva Conventions don't have an exception for realities of war. Fourth, we demand a moratorium on AI-assisted targeting until an international legal framework is established. The technology moved faster than the law, and the gap between capability and regulation is being filled with the bodies of civilians.
And finally, we demand that you, our viewers, refuse to accept the disconnected narrative. When you see a story about a consulate shooting, ask about the foreign policy that created the anger. When you hear realities of war, say the word they won't, war crime. When they tell you AI makes war more precise, ask about the school. When they say there's a plan, remember that Germany's own chancellor says there isn't one. The power of this machine depends on your silence and your fragmented understanding. Break the silence. Connect the stories. That's how we hold power accountable.
This is Maya Clarity. Stay informed, stay critical, and never accept their version of reality without asking who benefits from you believing it. We'll be back tomorrow with more stories they don't want connected. Good night.
And I'm Alex Truth. Remember, the truth doesn't take sides, but it does take courage. Share this broadcast. Talk to your neighbors. Call your representatives. The realities of war are only inevitable if we let them be. Good night and stay vigilant.